Good morning, everybody. So based on your feedback from that form that you all filled out, as well as just some feelings that I felt last night during class, I felt like my introduction of content objectives and standards wasn't as clear as I would have liked it to be. And so I thought this morning I would create this video for you, a quick tutorial to go through it again. Hopefully this second reteach will make a little bit more sense. And I also want to model, it's totally okay as a teacher if you make mistakes, you mess up, nobody's perfect. We're all doing the best that we can to try to teach, and what's most important as a teacher is that we reflect on our teaching and then find ways in the next opportunity to teach to reinforce, reteach, strengthen. So I just want you all to be okay with that, because I know as you begin to teach in this class and even beyond, some of you may be a little worried about, oh, I don't want to mess up, I don't want to make mistakes. You're not going to hurt anybody. There's always opportunities to try again. We are very much a growth mindseted field. What we're training you to do in this program, sorry to get a little bit on a soapbox, is to be more cognizant and aware of your decisions, and then even to reinforce your reflective abilities to kind of analyze and unpack your teaching and your outcomes, and then determining what you can do next. And so hope that helps just as a quick model. Anyways, without too much side deterring, because we have got a lot to go through in this video and I don't want to be too long, let's jump into it. So you want to go to the California Department of Education, you want to go to Teaching and Learning here, and you want to pick your subject area. I'm going to go with history and social science this time, because yesterday history and social science gave me this framework, and it was something I had never seen before, and I was a little concerned that they had updated the standards and I was unaware. But as I did some studying this morning, I realized that was just a framework to implement the standards. As you can see down here, those aren't the actual standards. So the standards you're going to find for all of you under content standards. You'll have that same link under each of your subject matter areas. And it'll take you to this page, which actually has everybody's standards. So you'll see English, English language development, that's the ELD, right? CTE standards, computer science, health education, and so forth. So history and social science, here are your standards, a little bit old, but I guess timeless according to the state. So I'm going to click those, and I'm going to model that. And so what you see in your standards for all of you are typically standards from kindergarten through 12th grade. You want to make sure that you're citing standards in grades 7 through 12 because you're secondary or single subject students. And so I'm going to scroll past some of the elementary standards and get to 7th grade, right? And you'll notice for some of you, typically the first number in your standard notation will be the grade level. And so that might help you, some of you, as you try to make sense of the kind of numerical notations that they do for standards. So I'm going to go ahead and pick one from history, and so we can break this down together. I think I had it in 7.5. Yeah, so we're going to do 7.5 number 4. I'm going to highlight this right here. So trace the development of distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. Now remember, when I look at the standard, I want to break down the knowledge, the skills, and the reasoning that's required, and if there's a product in this particular standard. Well, first, when I see just that sentence, I don't see any product. I don't see the standard asking them to write something, to create a project, to give an oral presentation. So there's no product that will result of the standard, which leaves it up to me to assess how I want to have them produce or demonstrate their learning. So now I want to look for the other three, right? What's the knowledge? So I start looking and I see, well, the things they're probably going to need to know are the distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. And so as a content expert, I'm not, right? So you history people are going to go, oh, I know what that is. Or if you're like me and you know a little bit about history and history teaching, you might have to brush up a little bit. I love that some of you did that yesterday. I got to go back to my books and my training and my content understanding and what are those distinct forms of Japanese Buddhism. Maybe do a little studying in preparation for that. So you want to break down what knowledge you feel like is essential for students to learn. Now let's talk about skills. I don't see any big skills here, like things like they have to actually physically do things. Some standards might do that. You see that more in PE, right? In PE, they might have to, like do movements or those kinds of skills. Or even in English, they may have to do, even though they're doing a product, writing is a skill. Maybe in history, you start to see writing being a skill. So I'm not seeing any skills, but I definitely see some knowledge. But that trace the development seems a little bit analytical to me in terms of reasoning skills, right? They have to really kind of break down how distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism have developed over time. And that would take, a little bit of breaking down analytical thinking to get there. So I know they need to analyze. It's definitely a reasoning skill that they would need in order to master that standard. So I hope that helps in terms of standards. That's how you want to look through and break down each of your standards, is in that way of thinking, right? Because it will help you now as you switch to objective writing. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up a little document that I created here for objective writing. So when I go to write my objective now for the day, remember yesterday we talked about CARTs, right? You need to include the content. Well, you have that already. You know that you need to include distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. You need to have it be attainable in one period. Maybe the analytical thinking that's required takes a few periods. And so in this particular period, we're going to focus on maybe just identifying those forms of Buddhism. And then in the next period, we might unpack that a little bit more and start breaking things down and showing how they developed. Or however you want to sequence it. That's just a sample idea, right? When I move to R, results-based, some people write their objectives by including the assessment, right? So when they say results-based, like I'm going to have them write a paper, I'm going to have them produce a diagram, I'm going to have them do whatever that will demonstrate that they are meeting the standard. And your content objective should include that. If you choose to not include that and instead have this as your objective, just make sure that as you're writing the objective for yourself, that it's in your mind. I've done both. I don't think there's not a lot of research to support whether one is more effective than the other in terms of student learning. But as long as students are aware of how you're going to assess them or what's going to be expected of them, I think that's what's most important, whether you do that orally or if you have it in writing. And so going back through my thinking level, right, that's going to be my Bloom's verb. Now, when I say Bloom's verb, I kind of skimmed over this yesterday. Bloom's taxonomy is one cognitive higher order thinking framework. There's a few others that I'm going to introduce later in the course. But essentially, you have to ask yourself, for that particular standard, am I wanting them just to know these things, recall, recognize? My son this morning was like, oh, I need to memorize this thing. So that's more knowledge, right? Okay, that's good. Do you know how to memorize? Maybe I have to memorize my multiplication chart or whatever. Or do we want them to comprehend, which is more beyond memorization and not just repeating back, things that they remember, but a little bit more of making sense, right? So now I can put it into my own words. That's more comprehension. Application means they're actually going to do it. They're going to use it. They understand kind of the concept and now they need to put it into practice. Analysis, they break it down, right? They're able to look at, a core concept and understand all its parts and its interrelationships. Synthesis is actually when I bring two things together and formulate a new conclusion. And then evaluation is when I essentially use all of those ideas and try to make a sound judgment about something and support it by maybe knowledge comprehension or analyses that I've had. This is somewhat of a linear model from lower level thinking to higher level thinking. And so when I say Bloom's, if we're thinking, like we said, with that standard analysis, then I want to use one of these verbs for tracing if I want to get them there in that one lesson. I did say that they probably are going to need to understand the distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. So I may want to come up more here, right? Or maybe even the knowledge level, just to start for today. And so that's what I'm talking about over here when I say a Bloom's verb. And then SWBAT is an acronym for students will be able to. I've had people also use, and I should put that here. Actually, let me kind of bring it over here. Just thinking about that. IWBAT, which is I will be able to. Just makes it a little bit more personal for students. Again, there's so many different ways to write objectives. I'm just giving you a standard form and making sure that you include all of the CARTs elements. And speaking of CARTs, I forgot the S, right? So it needs to be student friendly. And so I don't want to use big language. It's okay to use some academic terms and explain it, but I want to make it so that students understand it. Okay, so with that in mind, I've broken down the standard. I understand objective writing. Let's produce an example really quick. And I'm going to use, I'm going to kind of copy and paste really quick. Come down here, just center that, and use this one. So I'm going to do students will be able to, or I will be able to. And I'm going to replace that now with my verb. And so I'm going to go over to my chart and say, okay, I'm at the comprehension level. What do I really want students to be able to do? Well, I definitely want students to be able to distinguish, because it's not just that they understand forms of Buddhism, but I want them to understand the differences, right? And so it's very much a comprehension, not yet an analytical, not that there's, the idea that they're tracing the development yet, but at least that they understand, just in this lesson, the different forms of Buddhism. So I'm going to use the word distinguish. I feel like that's a good word for students. So now they're going to know the difference. Okay, and so now what's my content, right? Well, I can go back to my standard, and it was pretty much there, right? They're going to distinguish. And if I wanted to, I could just copy that. And don't feel like you're cheating by any means. We're just making things easier. Oops. Let me go ahead and go back to what I had before. And so now I have my objective. And if I take away my plus signs here, I essentially have students will be able to distinguish distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. So that's this first one. Now, what if I wanted to add the assessment? I could do another plus, right? Or what I normally write is by, and then I add the assessment, by creating a, let's just say Venn diagram, right? If I want to do it that way. Or if I wanted to have them write an exit ticket. But notice the creating a Venn diagram is not what they're learning, right? And that was the question I kept asking yesterday. If your objective should be able to answer, what are students learning? What they're learning is to distinguish distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. This is letting them know, you're going to help me understand that you know those things, or that you've mastered this objective by creating a Venn diagram. But now you can see why personally I favor maybe not adding the assessment, because it just gets a little wordy and it might confuse students. Wait, am I learning how to create a Venn diagram, or am I learning to distinguish distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism? Students might think that. And so I tend to omit and just go with this first piece. But keeping in mind how I will assess them is what's important. And then that I mentioned, hey, throughout this lesson, I'm going to have you do that. You could still do this. You just want to make sure as you're explaining the objective to students, and I would model this as in, okay, students, today we're going to be distinguishing distinctive forms of Japanese Buddhism. And by the end of class, you're going to create a Venn diagram to show me that you understand that. That would be a simple way for students to go, okay, cool, I know what we're doing today. So that is that. I hope that's a little bit clearer than it was yesterday. So feel free, go back through this video at your own pace. If I was talking a little quickly, slow me down, pause me, practice a little bit. If you want to shoot me over one of your objectives and say, hey, I think, this is how I do it. This was the standard I used. Walk me through your process. By all means, I'd love to give you feedback, and hope that makes the objective writing and standard breaking down process a little bit more clear.